Hi Wolves! Today I'm going to be showing you how to make a minimal style trap song. It sounds like this. In this video I'm going to be breaking down this song for you and showing you all the different groups and tracks and instruments and buses, all the production and mixing that goes into making a song like this. So hopefully you can learn something. Hopefully you can learn enough to make a song like this on your own. If you want to listen to the finished version of the song, I will put a link in the description for you to stream it. For now, let's get into it. Starting with the intro, it sounds like this. There's not much going on in the intro. There's a couple transition effects just to kind of give some texture. There's these reverse percussion tambourine samples and some cymbals. There's this glitch loop I made with shifter. If you want to know how to make this, I have a YouTube short called How to Make Glitter, and that will go into the actual sound design behind this. It's basically shifter, phaser, delay, flanger, a combination of those things. This is just to fill out the high end of the frequency spectrum a little bit more, just to add a little bit of texture and space. It sounds pretty cool. It sounds like kind of peaceful and mysterious. There's this really long reverb of the lead, and then another layer, which is just a single shot of the lead playing the root note. This is all just to kind of be background noise and to tease the melody a little bit. You can use a lot of different things here. Pretty much anything you want will work. You just have to make it sound mysterious and a little bit more chill. Usually cut out some of the highs or some of the lows or both during this part of the song, just to kind of build a little bit of tension, and then tease the lead a little bit. Then we get into the first verse. It sounds like this. So the main lead is this ARP that I made in Serum. You can try to recreate this wavetable on your own. The effects are pretty standard, just making it wider, adding some distortion, delay, compression, reverb. It's layered with a piano. A really quiet piano, and then it's also layered with a sine wave just to give it a little bit more weight. If you have a lead that just doesn't sound as punchy or as low as you want it to, you can just add a sine wave and just play the root notes. That will help a lot. That's a trick I use a lot. It just kind of makes this ARP just a little bit more powerful, adds a little bit extra punch to the low end. The reverb shots continue. This is just that first note of the ARP, just with a lot of reverb on it. This is a really good trick to fill out the frequency spectrum, and it just sounds good overall. It sounds good with pretty much anything, as long as there's not too much going on in the song. There's this pad. This is just a respace with a saw waveform. I don't have the Serum in front of me, there's really not a lot going on with this. It's just serum with a saw wave. And then there's another layer, and it's just playing the same thing, like 3 octaves higher. And then it's being panned right to left. This is being panned right to left, and then the other things that are in that same frequency spectrum are being panned also. Usually I'll pan one starting in the left and the other starting in the right. A lot of people know about that. The left and right mixing is super important, but if you don't know, hopefully that explains it. For the drums in this part, it's pretty standard. We just have a kick and some percussion. This percussion loop I made with just like a rim shot, and then I was putting it through spectral time, which is basically giving it delay, just to kind of give it a little bit of a glitchy sound, and then running it through autofilter with a bandpass to stop it from getting super repetitive. Because if you're using the bandpass, like sometimes you're hearing the lower parts, sometimes you're hearing the higher parts, just to give a little bit of variation so it doesn't get super boring. I'm using an EQ to cut the frequencies where this lead is playing. Just to give the lead a little bit more room and to hopefully make it easier to hear. The percussion loop is sidechained to the kick. You don't have to do this. You can always just manually cut the volume here like I'm doing. Sometimes I will start with sidechaining and then I'll get rid of it later, and then sometimes it will just stay there, just to avoid things getting too messy and avoid creating a whole bunch of resonances that you don't want. Like, you want resonances sometimes, but not always, especially when you're creating resonances with the kick, so I'm sidechaining it. The second half of the verse, there's these clock ticks. These are really good to use in your drums, I think, especially for your builds. It sounds mysterious, I don't know another way to describe it, but it also fits with this theme of the song. The song is called Twilight Zone, and the clock ticks are kind of like hypnotizing almost, like they're hypnotizing you into the Twilight Zone or something. They're kind of there for that reason. They're also there just to give the second half of the verse a little bit more variation. And then we transition into the first build.
The Twilight Zone.
So here we are washing out the verse with echo. So I'm just turning up the dry wet of the echo so that you're hearing it more. And then we're also using reverb to wash it out after the echo, because we cut all of these lead instruments here so that the listener can just focus on the build. Sometimes you can leave these instruments in here, but a lot of the times it just becomes too much in the song, and it's good to cut things so it sounds like the song is changing. But we do keep the bass and the pad. Then the second half of the build, the pad slides up 2 semitones. It's not sliding up because it sounds good, it's sliding up to build tension, and because it sounds bad, because it makes the listener kind of slightly uncomfortable, so that when we go back to playing the root note, it's kind of a release of all the tension that was building during the build-up. The drums are pretty simple. It's the same kick from the verse, but it's a little bit longer. There's a little bit more release on the kick. We bring in this clap. There's kind of 2 versions of the clap, the main clap and then one with a lot more attack. and there's also reverb on it, and then the reversed reverb. It's layered with a snare. There's that same percussion loop, except now it's repeating. Halfway through, we bring in another snare, and this snare is just playing 16th notes over and over. And then I'm using shifter to pitch it up and a really aggressive bandpass to only play parts of it, and then the bandpass increases in frequency along with the pitch. This is pretty cool. I think this sounds really good. I use it on a lot of trappier songs and a lot of dubstep songs too. It's just a good way to build tension during the build-up because it's getting pitched up and it's really fast, which works pretty well with the second half of the build. We have a downlifter. I like to use those at the start of the build because it kind of just sounds cool. There's that same tambourine transition. It's reversed and then it plays normally. There's some white noise. This, I believe, is the pad from the verse with a lot of reverb on it. And then there is this, which is the main lead. This is another riser. This, I just took the main lead, put a lot of reverb on it, and then put a flanger on it, and then increased the feedback of the flanger to give it this rising sound effect. That's a really good tip for making risers, is use something that's already in your song and turn it into a riser so that it kind of fits more nicely into the song. It doesn't sound out of place because it's a sound that the listener has already been hearing. There's another layer of reverb. This is just the main lead with a lot of reverb on it. And the main lead plays a little bit during the build-up, but you don't even really hear it at all. Right before the drop, there's the vocals.
The Twilight Zone.
For this, I'm using the envelope follower with delay and reverb so that when there's no vocal, when there's no volume and it's quiet, you're going to have more delay and more reverb. And then when it's loud, there's going to be less delay and reverb.
The Twilight Zone.
So that way you kind of get to hear the delay and reverb without making it muddy. I'm using envelope follower for that. You could use sidechain also. You could sidechain it to the dry signal.
The Twilight Zone.
Yeah, I use that on a lot of different things. Usually vocals, but you can do it on everything. I've started doing that with like half of my reverbs, just sidechaining it to the dry signal. Then we get into the first drop. It sounds like this.
The Twilight Zone. Twilight.
So we'll start with the drums. They sound like this. It's that same kick and snare from the build. I did tune this kick to A because that's the key of the song. Some kicks you really can't tune, some of them you can. It really depends, and it depends if you really want to tune your kick. You definitely don't have to. I'm using a little bit of a pre-kick. I'm not sure what to call this thing, but it kind of just leads into the kick a little bit. It's just the kick reversed, and it's really quiet. And that helps because it just makes the kick sound better in the song. It fits in a little bit better, but also the things that are sidechained to it will duck the kick a little bit easier because it's also ducking this pre-shifted part of the kick. Pretty standard trap snare, just with reverb on it. The trap snare is also tuned to A. It's the same thing as the kick. You really don't need to tune it. Some snares work better than others for tuning. This is a pretty melodic song, so I was able to find a snare that actually works for tuning. And you want to find one that's already in A. You don't really want to have to change the pitch of the snare a lot because you'll just lose the audio quality. You want to find one that's in A already. There's some percussion, just a clap that's kind of layered with some other perks, just to give a little bit more variation. For the percussion, we have a crash and hi-hats. That same tambourine transition effect. The hi-hats are kind of interesting here. They're basically broken up into 3 different versions, fast, medium, and slow. And what I like to do with these is have the speed of the hat change with the kick and the snare. So here when the kick hits, the hat is going fast, and then the snare and it's slow, and then the kick and it's slow. So it's kind of just changing the speed whenever the kick or snare hits. I like to think of the kick as like an on-off switch. Like it's off here and then it turns on. I hope that makes sense. And that pretty much just repeats for the second half of the drop. For the bass in this drop, it is in the key of A. So this is pretty important because A is pretty high up as far as your bass goes. Usually people would say F is good because F is kind of like the perfect amount of low bass, but also high enough to be punchy because your ears are going to be able to hear this area of the frequency spectrum a lot better than the lower end. So a lot of people would say this song should be in the key of F instead of A because then you're going to be getting the lower bass that's kind of more powerful. And usually that's true. Sometimes I like to make a song in the key of A because I like the bass to just sound so much more loud than it actually is. That was kind of the goal with this song, is to just make a song with a really loud bass line and a really trappy drum loop. That was really my goal with this, not to make the perfect trap song, but just to make something that I like. This is definitely the kind of style of music that I like, and it really revolves around this bass line. The bass line itself is pretty simple. It's mostly playing A over and over. Sometimes it goes down to G, sometimes it slides down to F. When your bass is in audio like this, you can make it slide a lot easier. So I'll usually get it in audio pretty much as fast as I can. For the first fourth, it is going A to G. And then the second fourth, it's going A to F. Just a slight variation. A small thing is that G is higher up than F, so I like to play the higher notes before the lower notes. Start high and go low is usually how I'll approach these things. That's just a small note, but it's usually what I'll do in my songs. For the leads, we have this main lead. And I have a YouTube short about how to make this. It's called How to Make a Trap Pluck. It's not super complex, but if you want to see the processing for this, you should check out that YouTube short so you can see it. As far as the mixing for this goes, it was super wide, and so I'm using envelope follower again to cut the width when it's more quiet. So when it's loud, like right here, when it first plays, we get more width, especially in the fundamental. But when it's more quiet, like right here, it's more thin. The width is more important right here when it's loud. I think it doesn't matter as much if this part is wide, it's really quiet. And the listener is going to hear that this part is wide, and then I think their brain is just going to tell them, oh, this part is also wide, even though it's much more thin. And having it be more thin here lets us make all the other layers more wide here to just make the entire song sound wider, even though it's pretty controlled. The pluck then goes into a saturator, multiband compressor to boost it. At the end of the drop, we wash it out with reverb. Some EQ automations, a little bit of cutting the frequencies that are really annoying. And then I'm only cutting them after the note plays because we do want those frequencies. These annoying frequencies that are bad, and they sound really bad, are actually really important. You don't want to fully get rid of them. You do want them, believe it or not. As much as you might not like them, they do add character to your song. Another small thing is I'm cutting some of the low frequencies after this first note plays, and that's just because this first note is an octave lower. So after that note plays and we don't need these low frequencies anymore, we cut them to make room for the bass and for the other layers. For the other layers, there's a sine wave, just to add a little bit more low end, some more energy to the low mids. Piano to add some more space to the highs. And then cutting these frequencies where the lead is playing. The reverb shot, this is just this first note with a lot of reverb, and then it's reversed. So usually you'll play the reversed one right before the start of the loop, right before the downbeat, and then the normal one when the original note plays. So it kind of gives a little bit more texture to the entire song. It's like it's going down here and then you reverse it and it's going up, so there's like a constant layer of white noise. And then I'll usually cut these layers where the lead is, like I'm doing here, just cutting that frequency. That's where the lead is playing the most. And then also cutting the sides out sometimes. Then we transition out of the first drop and it sounds like this. For this section of the song, this is kind of like the breakdown after the drop, when you kind of remove some elements and it sounds extra trappy. At this point here, I am cutting the snares and the clap layers, replacing it with just this really quiet clap. So instead of kick and snare, it's just the kick. There's a new hi-hat loop that comes in. this one, it's good to bring in a different hi-hat loop at this point of the song, and you want one that is a little bit more spacey, a little bit less intense, a little bit more reverb usually. Cut out some more of the highs in really all of the drums at this point. The main difference is that the snare is missing and I'm cutting out a lot of the highs, and there's a different hi-hat just to give the drums a different feel at this point. So we're cutting out more of the highs on the kick to give it kind of a deeper sound. The percussion is a little bit lower as well. But the main shift comes from cutting out the lead and a slightly different bass line. The bass, we're cutting out more of the highs here as well, just a little bit. I mean, it looks like it moves from what, 140 to 111, so not a huge difference, but big enough to sound different for sure. There's this other bass line. It's basically an 808 mixed with a tom, just to give some more variation. For these bass lines, it's usually good to have a combination of super long notes and then really short notes. That's basically what this is doing here. We're adding in some vocal layers, just some samples. Starting with a higher vocal and then going to a lower vocal. These always sound really good in these minimal style trap songs. If you're at this point in the song and it's sounding empty and boring, I would say try adding some vocal samples like this, even just a vocal shot, and then putting a lot of reverb on it. That's what I did with this song. I got to this point and I couldn't figure out what was going on. Something was missing. It was sounding empty and boring, and I couldn't figure it out. And I went and listened to some of my older music, and I decided to copy my own idea, which was just to add a vocal sample like this. I think it worked out pretty well. There's these glitches. I made these with Flanger and just randomly automating the flanger settings with a lot of feedback just to get these weird sounds. And I put the flanger on this ARP, so it still sounds kind of like the lead is playing. So it sounds a little bit familiar. The reverb shots continue. And that's basically it for this part of the song. We transition out of this into the second verse.
There is a fifth dimension, beyond that which is known to man. It is a dimension as vast as space and as timeless as infinity. It is the middle ground between science and superstition, between the pit of man's fears and the summit of his knowledge. It is an area which we call the Twilight Zone.
For this part, we start by transitioning out of the drop with these effects. We have a low impact that's reversed into a regular impact. A cinematic impact, just to give a little bit more punch to this part right here. And then a reverb clap just to fill out the higher end of the frequencies. Those together sound like this. And then they're sidechained to the last kick. I put one more kick here just for everything to have something to be sidechained to. So it sounds like this. And then we go into the vocals here. This part is pretty cool, I think. So the vocals are split into 2 layers. We have the low layer, which sounds like this, and the high layer, which is the glitch layer.
There is a 5th dimension.
So the low layer has a vocoder on it, and it has an external carrier, which is this. So this is muted. You don't actually hear this in the song. It's just a sine wave playing A, or saw wave playing A. And we're using the vocoder to use that saw wave as the carrier. And what that means is that anytime there are frequencies here in the vocal, they are going to be kind of replaced with a saw wave, which means that our vocals sound like a robot, like this. Yeah, and that's just for the lows, so it kind of gives bass to the voice, but it also still sounds like a voice. It's pretty cool. The high layer is high passed, so we don't have those low frequencies because that's being used by the bass. And then it is going through shifter, which is changing the pitch, and it's also adding some delay. And I'm using envelope follower to give it more feedback and more dry wet when it's quiet. So we get this weird glitchy sound, but you can also hear the vocal.
There is a 5th dimension, beyond that which is known to man. It is a dimension as vast as space and as timeless as infinity.
And that's just for the higher frequency layer, because if you put all of that delay and shifting on the bass, it would just be a mess. But then we do put both of those layers, the bass and the high layer, through delay and reverb.
There is a 5th dimension.
With the envelope follower again. And then that goes into another envelope follower that we are using to duck the samples.
There is a 5th dimension, beyond that which is known to man.
So you can see here, these frequencies are being cut on this group, which is really just reverb. And they're being cut because of this envelope follower. When the vocals are louder, it's going to cut more frequencies from this group. So that's a pretty good mixing strategy, because we don't want to completely get rid of these reverb layers, and we don't want to always be ducking these frequencies. We only want to duck them when they need to be ducked. So we're using an EQ with an envelope follower. You could use sidechain too. You can manually draw in your automations. You can do this a lot of different ways. This is just the way I'm doing it in this song. The second half of this is the build, even though there's pretty much no drums. It's really just these risers again. And then we are cutting everything 2 bars, 2 beats before the drop.
The Twilight Zone.
Just to give the vocals a little bit of extra reverb. We also didn't have any drums here, so there's nothing to cut. We're not really missing out on anything by cutting this. It's literally just like the risers that we're cutting here. So we go into the second drop. It sounds like this.
The Twilight Zone. Twilight.
So this part of the song, the drums are the same. I'm not going to go over those again because it's literally the exact same drum pattern. The main difference is the lead. It's the same lead, but it's playing a polymeter. And what that means is if I have this loop here and it's playing this melody, and then I double the length of time that it takes for it to play the melody, I can just hit this. Now it's just going to take twice as long to play the melody. The notes are all twice as long. They're twice as spaced out. Sounds like this. So it's the same melody. It just takes a different amount of time to play it. That's what a polymeter is, if you didn't know. I think polymeters are super, super good, and I don't hear very many people talk about them at all in their tutorials. I've only heard 2 people ever mention it, ever. And one of them is Virtual Riot, so shout out to him for showing me this. It's like one of my favorite things for creating melodies. You can go crazy with it and have one layer play a polymeter and one not play a polymeter. But this is what it sounds like the first drop. I'll play the first drop and then the second so you can hear the difference. That's basically the main difference in the second drop, is that it is a polymeter this time. I'm cutting out some more notes just because it adds a little bit more variation.
Twilight.
But the rest of it is pretty much the same. There's the same layers, the piano and the sine wave and the reverb layer that are layered with it. And then at the end of the second drop, we don't have the breakdown section that was in the first drop. The song kind of just ends there after we do this outro. The outro is the same transition effects. And then the reverb layers, the high pad, and then using reverb to wash it out, so the reverb amount is increasing here at the end. Then one final note plays. I like to end a lot of my songs with just that final note to resolve the melody. So that's it for the song. As far as the mixing goes, I route most of my leads to the same place, except the bass. It's just this. So on this group for the drop, I am using Ozone to do dynamic EQ, stereo imaging, saturation, and then a little bit more dynamic EQ. It was pretty wide, so you can see I'm cutting the width on the lower parts of the frequency spectrum. The higher parts get to be wider. I'm using a saturator to saturate the width a little bit more than the center. And then spectral shaper to cut some of the high frequencies for the resonances. So all of the samples and leads and vocals go through that. And then I do the same thing for all of the drums, the verse drums, the build drums, the drop drums. They all go to the drum group, which is doing the same thing, dynamic EQ, imaging, saturation. And then for the verse, all of the effects and the leads go the same group, and they also do most of the same things. Dynamic EQ, imaging to control the width, and then saturation to saturate the width. Then that all goes to the main bus, which just does dynamic EQ. I have a clipper and a limiter on it right now, but when I actually export the song, I turn this off. But the finished version does have this on it. When I master the song, it's on there. So that's it for this one. I am going to play the second drop of the song one more time, and then I will let the video end. If you do want to listen to the finished version of the song, I will put a link for you to stream it in the description. But for now, that's the end of this video. I hope you learned something. I hope you liked the video. If there's anything I missed, let me know in the comments. Feel free to like and subscribe. But that's it for this one. Peace out, y'all.
And superstition between the pit of man's fears and the summit of his knowledge. It is an area which we call the Twilight Zone. Twilight.